Thank you, Catherine, for that generous introduction. I travel lightly, so I didn't bring any books with me. I have a new book out this week, The Corruption Chronicles. It's available at Amazon.com, but I don't have any with me. I don't have any computer-aided speaking tools with me, but I do have the facts with me. And the facts are very troubling. Judicial Watch, those of you who does not know who Judicial Watch is, well, sometimes even our friends need to be reminded who we are. We're a nonpartisan, independent watchdog group. We use the Freedom of Information Act to gain access to government information. We also sue government agencies and politicians where we can to help enforce the rule of law. We combat corruption. We're in favor of limited government, obviously, but we want honest government. And we know that small government, as conservatives, is more honest than big government. But in the least, you would think liberals, conservatives, Republicans, and Democrats could all agree on honest government. And it usually depends on who's in office. But with Judicial Watch, we have this massive network of grassroots supporters. We have over 250,000 supporters that have made us the largest independent grassroots watchdog group in the country. There's no one else that does this in terms of consistently and persistently trying to uncover what the government's up to, and once we find out in terms of bad conduct or misconduct, trying to stop it in its tracks. Now, the issue of election integrity obviously goes to the way our government runs. We don't want our elections stolen, do we? I say this with all seriousness and in a nonpartisan way. It's not because I don't want Obama to win the presidency, but I'm concerned that President Obama's people, both in the administration and his allies outside and his campaign, want to be able to steal the election if necessary in 2012. They want to be able to steal the election if necessary in 2012. And you've seen elements of why I think that already in the presentations today, and I wasn't here last night, but I'm sure John covered it as well. And let me weave the conspiracy theory, as the left would like to say. But let me put out some facts there. We have a Justice Department. The law requires that states take reasonable efforts to clean up the rolls. Now, let me tell you about that law, the National Voter Registration Act. It was passed during the Clinton administration, signed into law by Bill Clinton, and it had been a bugaboo of the left to get this law passed because they wanted massive voter registration, a la Acorn, to overwhelm the system. They wanted to register the welfare voters. They wanted to register people at the DMV. And obviously they saw it as a vehicle to get more voters who would vote for socialists, who would then dole out more benefits and get more voters that way in terms of their long-term progressive agenda. And it was sold to Republicans. The Republicans generally were opposed to it, conservatives were, with the provision, well, you know, we'll add all these people to rolls, but we'll have this provision that's also enforceable to make sure that the states clean up the rolls so that there's less maintenance efforts. But guess what? The law's passed and the Justice Department, the left controls the Justice Department, whether it's Republicans or Democrats in office, refused by and large to enforce that provision of the law. So we had all this increase in voter registration, but none of the concurrent policing of the rolls to make sure that dead people were removed from the rolls and such. So you have this administration comes into power. During the Bush administration, there were one of our partners in our election integrity effort is Christian Adams, and he and other few lawyers, the Justice Department actually took steps to enforce that part of the law to clean up the voter registration aspects of, to clean up the list. But he was opposed by liberals outside and inside the administration. And of course, once the leftists took full control with the emergence of Barack Obama's presidency, all those enforcement efforts practically stopped. And in fact, we uncovered, and we did an analysis last year that's still valid, that there are about a dozen states where you have counties. As you know, most of the counties run the data, but the states are responsible in the federal law for running a maintenance program or taking reasonable steps to clean up the rolls. But we have a dozen states or so where you have many counties where they have over 100% of the eligible population on the rolls. Now, lawyers will tell you you don't necessarily need over 100% in order to challenge whether there's adequate list maintenance. But that was a pretty clear-cut line. If they got more people on the rolls than are living there, they're probably not cleaning the rolls properly. They're not removing dead people. They're not removing ineligible voters. They're not removing people who have moved away. And of course, if you don't vote for several elections, you can be removed as well. So that's a real concern. And one of those states is Florida. Another one of those states is Indiana. Another one of those states is West Virginia. Another one of those states is Ohio. And in Missouri. And in Colorado there are problems. And in California there are problems. And many of those states, as you know, are swing states. So if you've got this opportunity for voter fraud, obviously if you got more people on the rolls than you have available to vote, you've got a massive potential attack on our election that could take place, or at least on the integrity of the election. So I'm convinced, and of course the Justice Department is taking virtually no steps, as far as I can tell, to help clean up the rolls. Now, as Catherine was saying, in Florida, we had told the Secretary of State in February about this problem. And long before this hit the news, we got a letter back saying we've got this problem of 53,000 voters, Mr. Fitton. We're going to remove those. And obviously then they took those steps to remove ineligible alien voters from the rolls. Ineligible alien voters. These are people who are not citizens, who are here either legally or illegally, but either way cannot vote. And the state didn't take steps to remove them from the rolls. All they did was they took steps to find out if they were indeed what we suspected they were. And that's when the Justice Department stepped in. Why on earth would the Justice Department be opposed to taking reasonable steps to remove alien voters from the rolls? They need the vote. They need the vote. And I want to tie that to another issue. So that's kind of suspicion one. Suspicion two, dream amnesty. The president unilaterally deciding to grant amnesty to the people supposedly under 30. We now know recently that that rule isn't being enforced. If you say you're a member of Dream, if you get arrested or for a deportation or come into contact with the immigration authorities, just say you're covered by the act, and I think from what I'm hearing, they'll let you go, even if you're 60 plus. But also they're also not deporting tens of thousands of others who supposedly haven't committed serious crimes. But dream amnesty, introduced in an election year. In my view, when you tie it to the lack of cleaning up the voting rolls, when you tie it to the opposition to voter ID, which we know this Justice Department is on a jihad on, you are not talking about the Hispanic vote. You're talking about shoring up the illegal alien vote. The illegal alien vote. Well, you've heard where the polls are on voter ID. You've heard where the bipartisan concerns about voter ID. You heard the Supreme Court upheld voter ID, the majority written by the most liberal justice of our generation, who, by the way, was from Chicago. So he kind of knew why it's important to have not only clean and fair elections, but the perception that elections are free and fair. The question, why was there an increase in participation? Because people finally thought once the voter ID laws were passed, in my view, that their votes would be counted. In these areas where it's well known for fraud and they start policing it, people will come out to vote because they think, my gosh, my vote will get counted. And it won't be taken away by an illegal vote or not counted by other nefarious means. So look at all of this. You've got voter ID opposition. You've got dream amnesty for a group of population that's not eligible to vote, but seemingly the Justice Department, at least here in Florida, doesn't have a problem with them being on the voting rolls. And also, did you know that Project Vote and Acorn are working with the Justice Department right now? Did you know that? Well, we know that because we asked for the documents and have the documents showing that they're working with them. Now, if you may recall, Project Vote and Acorn were responsible for about 300 or 400,000 ineligible voter registrations in 2008. Criminal investigations of prosecutions in over a dozen states. Acorn proper pled guilty effectively in Nevada to issues related to election fraud. Now, if a conservative organization that had hired the president in power that won the election was involved in national voter registration fraud like this, do you think there would have been a national investigation by the Attorney General, the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department? Do you think? That hasn't happened with Acorn Project Vote, and they were the two partners involved in this. In fact, they're coordinating with the Justice Department on voter registration issues, working together on suing states to make sure that they're registering even more of Obama's food stamp army than have already been registered. Because most of the states make it easy to register to vote. I'm sure you've seen it personally here in Florida. But that's not enough for the left. You've got to do even more because they're concerned. They want to increase the number of voters that will vote for politicians they favor, and the policing in place that make it, like a voter ID and things like that, they oppose because they don't really care about the fraud. They just care about the vote. So I don't know about you, but I look at all of that and I see someone setting up an election to be stolen if necessary. And we go back a long way. Judicial Watch does in election integrity issues. In 2000, guess who got the idea to? Guess who was responsible for Al Gore challenging the election results in court? Judicial Watch was. You may not be happy about that, but it's true. Because we had looked at the Florida Sunshine Law, which I see you'll hear about later, and saw that it gave you access to the ballots. And we knew there was this controversy, so they said, we want access to the ballots. And so Al Gore's people said, well, if Judicial Watch can get access to the ballots, why can't we? Why don't we just do a revote? Why, let's not have this third-party group do a recount. We'll do the recount. Let's have an official recount. So I have to take some credit for Al Gore figuring out that there was a possibility to get access to these ballots and do a recount. We did our own recount. We went across Florida counting the ballots, and we confirmed that Bush had won. I kind of would have loved to confirm that Gore had won just because we're troublemakers, but the fact is he did win. But remember, what was the vote? 537 votes. 537 votes. What are the number of aliens on the rolls here in Florida? In the least? Well, we know over 180 voted, but the number I think was 1,000 or 2,000. I forget the exact number now in the litigation. So this is a real serious issue. You don't need a lot of fraud to sway an election. You need a few hundred votes and fraudulent votes in a key state, and you could have a presidential election. And certainly, local and state elections and elections for federal offices below the presidency can equally be impacted. So this is a real crisis, and we're taking steps. As I said, we alerted Florida, we alerted the other states that I talked about. And the great thing about the voter registration law is that, of course, the left has been using this law to sue, to enforce its will. But it also provides aggrieved parties of anyone to sue to try to clean up the rolls. And Judicial Watch and True to Vote has filed the first lawsuits ever by a private individual group to clean up the rolls as opposed to expand them in a way that would give opportunity for fraud. Our first lawsuit in that regard was in Indiana. We, as Catherine said, we intervened in Florida. I think that lawsuit that we intervened in, I think the Justice Department lost. When it lost, technically, I'm not a lawyer, but I know enough that when they lost that first round, they lost. And I suspect they're going to end that lawsuit soon, especially given the agreement to provide access to Florida to the DHS list that would help them further remove ineligible alien voters from the rolls. But on the other hand, though, we know that our alerting these local authorities and state authorities to these concerns have resulted in the rolls being cleaned up. We know that here in Florida. In West Virginia, as you might imagine, there are 2 counties there where it was a terrible problem, and they are desperately trying to clean up the rolls as a result of our letter. You know, and I'm tired, I'm sure you are, of the ACLU and leftists in the Justice Department being the only ones that these local government officials and state officials are afraid of. They need to start being afraid of us. They need to start being afraid of us. And we've taken steps to try to defend, for instance, in Tennessee, you had a Democratic congressman who wasn't, I forget the nature of the error, but there was a mistake made and he was removed from the rolls. And he went to vote and I said, your name's not on the rolls, it was purged. And he said, well, you know, he made a big to-do about it. And they said, well, you can just do a provisional ballot and your vote will be counted once we verify who you are. He refused to do that. He sued. He sued. So we helped defend Tennessee in that regard. We've been helping in Pennsylvania on voter ID. This is a serious issue. The Justice Department is off the rails on this. It really is off the rails. This attack on Florida, if that didn't tell you that the Justice Department is not an arm of the Obama campaign, I don't know what would. I mean, this Attorney General is the absolute worst. And if you think you can rely on the federal government to maintain the integrity of the rolls, you have another thing coming. Now, we are proud to be working with True to the Vote. I'm proud that the other new kid on the block, that the Franklin Center are taking these effective steps at the local level to pursue accountability and enable citizens to keep an eye on the government. And obviously, Americans for Prosperity have been out there for a while doing this. And, you know, I know we had worked locally with the AFP chapter in Illinois over corruption issues there. You know, I can tell you that you have responsibilities to ensure that your elections are free and fair and clean of fraud. Now, the concern I had in Florida was the resistance of virtually every state, every county election official to the efforts of the state to remove the illegal aliens from the rolls. Now, I think any of the objections that they may or may not, that they may have had legitimately to using that list initially put out there to remove the illegal alien voters from the rolls will be alleviated and removed entirely by this new agreement with the Department of Homeland Security to, you know, there's little doubt that if someone's on the list the DHS has or not on the list DHS has, depending on the analysis, that the person should be removed and is not eligible to vote. But I think it's up to you individually from your individual counties to make sure to follow up with your local counties to make sure that the election officials are actually following up on this issue, and what are they doing to follow up on the issue? Because, guess what? They're obligated to tell you under federal law. They're obligated to tell you under federal law. So if you ask them, and I would encourage you to look at the letters that we have sent to the secretaries of state and other local officials on our website at judicialwatch.org. You can buy the book there too. You will see the letter that we sent out, and you can see the laws that we cited requiring a response in terms of giving you information as to what they're doing in, over this the Section 8 provision of the National Voting Registration Act. There's nothing that prevents an individual from sending a letter like that. And you're smart enough to know that what covers you and what doesn't in the letter, and feel free to cut and paste as you see fit. But the law is there for you to cite in terms of the information requirements and the responses required under law. Now, you may not get the response within the time, but I mean, certainly it helps if there are a bunch of people pressuring these local officials to make sure they're taking the steps necessary to maintain clean election lists. So this is an historic movement. You know, and I have to hand it to Catherine to taking the tiger by the tail. We've been looking at this and kind of circling around this issue for 3 or 4 years now and took strong action this year. But this is a major development in the history of citizen accountability and the Tea Party, that whole movement, to have this concern about election integrity and this grassroots approach to policing the rolls and policing our elections. And it's exposed, and the Justice Department is exposed as not being the protector of free and fair elections. And if the president loses in November, I think it's going to be important for us to make it clear to the new administration that this needs to be a priority. Because on top of Project Vote working with the Justice Department to file lawsuits, our documents showed that Project Vote was sending and recommending people to be hired by the Justice Department to police the elections. And those aren't going to be political appointees. They're going to be lawyers that are working there in the civil servant capacity, who won't necessarily leave if a new president comes into office. And they'll be there in the Romney Justice Department. And believe you me, they don't want to do this any more with Romney than they did under the president they supported, Obama. And obviously, if President Obama wins, our citizen activism is going to be that much more important because we know where they stand. I mean, we have this Obama campaign organizing against the Ohio voter ID law, suing here in Florida over modest efforts to police the voter registration fraud that took place in 2008 that they did not want repeated in 2012. This is the way it works. I've never heard of a presidential campaign attacking election integrity directly as this Obama campaign has. And I don't mean rhetorically, I mean in the courts. These ACORN groups, the group that we're talking, what was it, the Voter Citizen Participation Center, staffed by a former Obama activist. Guess who's running their voter outreach, their voter program that we're talking about? You can go to their website and see who it is. I just double-checked it before I spoke. A former Obama campaign staffer, trained at some left-wing institute, who's now running this a la this Project Vote type organization. And what their goal is they take all these voter registration forms and they dump them on state election officials and local election officials at the last minute. And I've talked to the election officials who have seen the criminal acts that have taken place. And they're there working, and all of a sudden they get 1,000, 10,000 new registration applications a few days before the election. So what does that mean? It means they can't properly vet the applications that are coming in. It means they can't clean up the rolls to the degree they're able to in the terms of normal maintenance processes. So if as a legitimate voter you need something done from your state election or your local election official, they might not be able to do it because they're dealing with all these extra registration applications coming in from Project Vote or from this new organization that I think needs to be criminally investigated, because I think they should know or if they don't know, they have reason to know that the lists they are using are improper. We do a lot of mail at Judicial Watch. Those of you supporters, know the amount of mail we do. So there are ways to make sure that the lists you are mailing to are clean and accurate. So the excuse that they just brought a commercial mailing list on the market and it had a bunch of dead dogs on it, that's no excuse. That's no excuse. Because there are lists out there that would get you access to the people that you want to register to vote, but who are otherwise eligible or likely to be eligible. But they chose evidently not to use it. But this is a group that was started in part by John Podesta. If you go to our website, you'll see in our Corruption Chronicles blog, which is also the name of our new book, you'll see a new investigation that we've just, I think, released yesterday, documenting the background of this organization. So this is not some fly-by-night storefront operation that just set up shop yesterday and just got itself into a little bit of trouble. This is a well-financed, well-organized organization that has people that come from the heart of the left establishment, the Project Vote, ACORN types. So you can see they're doing it again. They're doing it again under a new name. And Acorn, of course, has not gone away, for those of you who know. They've changed their name at the state and local level. Project Vote, which was an Acorn front, is still very active. They're active here in Florida. They're pushing, as I said, these voter registration issues. You know, in my view, they don't see the need as much for the massive voter registration fraud as they did in 2008, because they're using the Justice Department to force the states to open up the registration process to, you know, get all those ineligible voters on the rolls without any adequate policing. So it's a real crisis in terms of our election, and we're doing our best to try to maintain that the elections are free and fair, but it's not going to end with 2012. It's not going to end with 2014. We've got to be vigilant in protecting our liberty. I mean, this president's attack on our ability to govern ourselves through his unilateral actions are bad enough. You know, but if they start playing fast and loose with the elections, or they start doing things in ways that make people think the elections are not free and fair, that will do as much to suppress the vote as anything that, you know, the reformers are in terms of requiring voter ID and other election integrity measures. So that's the problem we face. I think we've provided an effective way, one of many that you've heard about today, to police that problem and to stand up against it in court. We need to use all the tools in our tool belt, and I'm telling you that we're able to do it in the courts. You can do it individually, and you know, let us know directly through our internet site if there are things that pop up that you think need attention, especially here in Florida, because of our interest, obviously, with the ongoing litigation. So with that, I think I have a few minutes for questions. Do I have any time for questions, Catherine? Two questions. Yes.
Are you familiar with the U.S. DOJ using the Voting Rights Act by the consent decree in some of Southern counties to try to bump up the Democrat voter rolls? There's a case in North Carolina.
Well, there are states that are subject. I'm not a lawyer, but my understanding is generally there are states and certain counties in certain southern states that are subject to pre-approval or pre-clearance for any substantive changes to voting requirements. And they're using that to challenge the Texas voter ID requirement and the requirement in South Carolina, and that's in trial right now. So we'll see how that turns out. But again, a direct challenge by the Obama administration to a voter ID requirement. You know, Eric Holder referred to requiring someone to get a birth certificate in order to get an ID as being the equivalent of a poll tax. I mean, does that sound like a centrist to you? Yes.
I fear that another part of it is the get out the vote effort being tied to this mass distribution of cell phones to persons funds that were paid for by the taxpayers and intended to be used for emergency. And I'm wondering if there's anything that can be done to prevent any administration from accessing those phone lines for any reason whatsoever.
I don't know. I would be more concerned about local officials using local resources. For instance, in the District of Columbia, the list of people on housing aid and the public projects were used by our now mayor. His campaign used it as a way to reach voters. So I would look more so for local officials using public government data that they're not supposed to kind of to do the voter outreach you're talking about. Just one more question. Well, I mean, if there's fraud to be found, there ought to be criminal prosecutions. I mean, it's in 2008 there were criminal prosecutions. There were at the local level, and the question is the Justice Department finally going to take a look at this? And you know, we're seeing it renewed with this Voter Citizen Participation Center, whatever it's called, that they still have this interest in, and they don't care about sending ineligible applications to officials and overwhelming them with that.
PR campaign that advertised the fact that there would be prosecutions after the election.
Well, I think it would be useful for citizens to call attention to that, letters to the editor and things like that. I mean, we do things like that and talk like that in our press releases and things like that. You know, the problem is the campaigns, you can't rely on the campaigns to do this. The politicians are, I can tell you that there are Republicans who don't want to clean up the rolls either. We're going to be suing Republicans and Democrats in our litigation. It's because they don't want to do this work either. I mean, there are more than a few Republicans locally. I know the counties in Florida that are over 100% are, I don't believe they're known as Democrat counties. I think they're up in the panhandle. So, got time. One more last quick question. Go ahead. There are state laws against voter registration fraud and voter fraud. Well, there are federal laws as well. I think, again, I'm not expert on as a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer, so take this advice for what it's worth. Is that my understanding is that your local prosecutors can take steps to police this issue as well. But it's fair to ask candidates where their stance is on this, because if they're not able to pursue litigation or prosecution, would they be willing to refer it to the prosecuting attorneys, public attorneys, U.S. attorneys, or state attorneys at the state level who could? So don't assume, just don't let them off the hook. If they say they're not, well, would they refer it if they weren't covered? There are many ways to ask the question. Demand accountability. So thank you very much. You can learn more about Judicial Watch. You can learn more about us at judicialwatch.org, judicialwatch.org, and there's plenty of great stuff there for you on this and other topics. Thank you very much.